despite being obsessed with Barbie when I was growing up, I never actually saw any Barbie films or TV shows, certainly not to my recollection. So I'm kind of fascinated by them now that I'm a fully grown adult and I'm not the target audience. Particularly the ones that are themed. So the Christmas ones, the spooky Halloween ones, and this one, Barbie in A Christmas Carol. I was particularly curious to watch this because I thought, well, how are they going to do this without making it too dark? Because the thing with Barbie films, I have seen a couple of them, of course, is that they are meant to be light and fluffy and pretty and good fun. And that's actually the case here, and it made it work, and I'm genuinely surprised. So this was released in 2008, directed by William Lowe, written by Elise Allen and Ruth Handler, based, of course, on the novella by Charles Dickens. And Barbie is voiced by Kelly Sheridan. Eden is voiced by Morwenna Banks, with a singing voice by Melissa Lyons. And the characters are certainly recognisable with who they're meant to represent. Eden is our Scrooge character, and I actually really like the description of her on the fandom wiki. And this says Eden is a glamorous singing diva in Victorian England and the owner of a theatre house. Glamorous singing diva in Victorian England. I think that's brilliant. It is set, of course, in London, in England, and Eden is a brilliant singer but a nasty person. She refuses to let the other people in the theatre, the rest of the company, go home for Christmas because she feels like they need to just continue rehearsing ahead of the show. And obviously that's very Scrooge of her and not very nice at all. And she is visited by the 3 ghosts to help show the error of her ways. You know, Ghost of Christmas Past, Ghost of Christmas Present, and what they're called spirits of past, present, and, well, future rather than yet to come. And in that respect, it kind of follows a very recognisable journey. But I would say it's not quite as dark or as creepy as A Christmas Carol. One of the things I love most about watching A Christmas Carol adaptations is seeing how they're going to do the ghosts, because every film interprets them in a different way. Some of them have them very ethereal and very sinister. Some of them, they just look like, you know, a living person. So this one is kind of like the ghost of a Barbie doll, which is a little bit bizarre, and it is a weird thing to consider. But it works really well, and it's not that creepy that young children would be scared, but it also feels realistic enough that I feel like I'm watching an adaptation of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. So in that respect, I was actually really quite impressed with it, and I thought it did quite a good job. The soundtrack is lovely, we have some beautiful singing voices in this, and it does feel Christmassy. The CGI quality is interesting. It feels like a lot of the other Barbie films. It's also a narrative within a narrative, which I forgot to mention. This is where Barbie comes into it. Barbie is trying to get ready to go out for the evening on Christmas Eve, but Kelly does not want to go. So Barbie decides to tell Kelly the story of Eden Starling, which is the film's version of A Christmas Carol. So that's where Barbie comes into it, but she's not actually a protagonist in this. We don't get to see her that often. Me being me, I don't care. But maybe for a young child who's obsessed with Barbie as a character, that may pose a problem. But ultimately, it feels like a Barbie film. It was a lot better than I expected. I really wasn't expecting much, but I was very curious. And it is actually delivered quite well. So it's a pretty interesting way of introducing a young child to the story of A Christmas Carol. I don't think if they watched this and then went and watched, say, The Muppets Christmas Carol or the one with Jim Carrey, I don't think they'd recognise them as being the same story. I think there are enough differences that they feel like different tales, but when you're very familiar with it, of course, the hallmarks of A Christmas Carol are all identifiable. Really, I'm not the target audience, but I still kind of enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun way of visiting one of my favourite stories, and certainly my favourite Christmas story. If you're a fan of Barbie, if you're the target audience, I think it's one that's going to be a pretty magical watch at Christmas.